We're very happy to welcome you to our series of webinars on ocean literacy. And we are super happy to see so many participants. We start it doesn't change with some way that I learned the technicalities of the program. Can you see the slides? Can everybody? Okay, so why doesn't it change the view? Yes.
We start, so Olga, myself from Acteon, hosting this webinar series on behalf of Responsible, and maybe a few words before we go into the content, explaining first why we have these webinars. Some of you might not have heard the term ocean literacy before. It is a relatively new term in the European context, but addressing part of some older challenges that you might have worked with under the names of awareness raising, capacity building, ocean marine education, whatsoever. It's a term that comes from the US, mainly from the communities of science and education. You find it back in the Galway Statement on Transatlantic Cooperation, and then it has been the focus of two Horizon 2020 projects, the Sea Change project that is now finished, and we'll have a pleasure to have John Parr, who coordinating this project, and then the Responsible projects, which we are coordinating with around 15 partners from Europe. What is important when ocean literacy came to Europe, initially this small term gained some importance, and today, as much in the field of science, education, training, but wider policy, it's a term that slowly found its place. Maybe one element as a starting point, as a reference for the discussion we have in this webinar, we think that an ocean literate person is aware of the importance of the ocean and of its current health, has some understanding of her own influence on the ocean, humans, and maybe vice versa, how important the ocean is for himself, herself, and then has some understanding of what to do to protect the ocean and to seize the opportunities the ocean offers. We will come back in the webinar. Sometimes, even if we know what to do, we might still not act and do what is required. And maybe the second point to put our webinar in a certain frame is that literacy, ocean literacy, is an issue for everybody, be it children, parents, citizens, consumers, professionals, civil society, decision makers, and scientists, and everybody within our science, that's our society. And that's something that will guide us in the webinar series that we will organize between now and February next year. The objectives of the series: first, sharing views, challenges, and best practices on ocean literacy, what was done, who was targeted, what was the impact, the effects of this literacy exercise. Second is to discuss how to build collectively effective ocean literacy in Europe and wider, and how best to mobilize all parts of society that needs to better understand the ocean. And the last one, maybe something that will be more transversal to the webinars, is identifying where we need more work for science, for education, for policies, for each of us. And then a more global objective is to widen the European community of practice of ocean literacy practitioners. I put European because this was the first aim of Sea Change and Responsible, but today with literacy being discussed elsewhere, you can think of widening the community of practice of ocean literacy practitioners. 7 webinars will be organized every second Thursday of the month between now and February next year, addressing issues linked to children education, consumers, other economic actors, fishermen, marine transport, literacy and blue growth, and then thinking about how to ensure effectiveness of literacy and see how this could be strengthened, be it as part of policies of wider initiatives. The synthesis we get out of seminars in terms of messages and recommendation will on one side feed into a conference that we will co-organize February next year, date to be defined, on making change happen so oceans are better protected and in better health, and literacy will be one element of making change happen. And the second will be to bring input to policy making with targeted products and participation in events. And when we say policy, we mean marine policies, potentially education policies, but also policies that do not seem to have much to do with marine. For example, consumer policy, potentially agriculture as being a key sectors, putting pressures on the ocean and marine ecosystem, etc., etc.
Now, just a few words on, for those of you who have not used this platform before, what you already noticed that all of the participants are muted as default, except for our speakers, panelists, and the host. And how we will communicate with you is you can use question and answer button for writing your questions, or if something that you would like to share with other participants of the webinar. And then depending on time, but we have very short time, only 1 hour. So we see if there will be a possibility to give some of you the floor, but a very, very short intervention. So if there's something really burning, you should use the raise hand button. And at the same time, please specify in the question and answer button what is that you would like to share, because I think we'll be very limited in taking, like having a really interactive discussions with a lot of verbal or oral interventions, but we will take all your question and answers as it comes. It's better to use question and answers and not the chat button. I hope that you all find the question and answer button. So otherwise it should be all very intuitive.
Let's go now to our first webinars where we had the general questions is about changing behavior. We all agree that the ocean might be in a poor state, that we all are individually or collectively responsible for these situations. And then the question is, a central one is how could we, or could you help me, myself, to change my behavior so I do better and integrate ocean issues in what I do? And the underlying question is, can better information and literacy, better understanding, help or not to change behavior? And that will be the first, the general issue of this first seminar. With us today, we have 4 persons, 5 supporting us. Let's say Steve Fletcher, UN World Conservation Monitoring Centers / Plymouth University. John Parr, From MBA UK, there was coordinator of the Change Project, Alessia Clocciati, and maybe some of her colleagues from European Commission, DG Mare, and then Olga coordinating the Responsible Project and myself supporting her in this task. So we'll try to entertain you with some of the elements, ideas we put on the table to steer you thinking. And because this webinar, it's only the first one, and we hope it will steer thinking and ideas. 3 questions we felt could be addressed in this webinar. First, can ocean literacy help changing behavior? The second one, what could be the right information to share? We put in bracket and for whom, because clearly depending on who we are working with, the information might be very different, diverse. And the third question is about what to do, which preconditions for making ocean literacy more effective. And more effective meaning ensuring people are aware, understand better, and are in a position to act. In the first questions, we'll have first some elements bring by Olga that comes from psychology, behavior change. Then we have a small pool where we feel each of you can share some of your experiences. And then John and Steve will give some reactions and practical examples from their experiences, specific project. And we might then have your question and reactions. As Olga said, maybe we will address them. Clearly, we will keep them on board. So we make sure that at some time you will find some answers from us and the panelists. Olga, what can psychologists tell us about changing your behavior?
Well, I'm actually not psychologist, but today I try to put together for you very briefly the main inputs of views from psychology. It's not a how to say, full complete list, and I hope that maybe some of the people with a psychological background are participating in the webinar can help us to enrich this. But to start with, as we say before, the main question is, okay, even if I have information, I have the knowledge, sometimes I would not act. And why is it? In psychology, there's a lot of growing amount of literature which explaining behavior with different models. And here on the slide, you see several type of frameworks and models which allow to understand how behavior change takes place. And just to briefly notice that the very first one is theory of planned behavior. There is no knowledge is considered in that theory. It's only based on the perceptions, values, and social norms. While in the further models, the models of responsible environmental behavior and pro-environmental behavior, the fellow psychologists already have started to put the role of knowledge into the model. So what we know actually does affect our behavior and our ability to change. There is an interesting theory. It's called theory of cognitive dissonance, which also highlights the contradictions between personal expectations, what we know, what we feel, our values, and the reality. So basically, some of the things that I know in my own feelings can be really in the contradiction with what type of behavior I need to do. So if I need to stop using plastic or something else, this would be something that becomes a barrier for my change if I personally love plastic. There is another theory that I think is very relevant to our discussions today. It's a theory of change, because it's a model, or it's a description, an illustration of how and why a desired change is expected to happen in a particular context. So it's a process in which you identify the objectives and its participatory process. And so I believe it's very important for us to know how as a process it can be used for going from point one to the change of behavior. On this slide, you see a graphical implementation of what is this model of pro-environmental behavior, where you can see our fellow psychologists have put together the internal and external factors. And black boxes are the barriers, which don't prohibit us from behaving in the pro-environmental way. And in white boxes, you see the enabling factors. And here you can see that knowledge, feelings and attitudes and values are these enabling factors. Now, if we want to summarize it, that for behavioral change, we are looking at motivating factors, both internal and external. And these are awareness, knowledge, attitude, social and personal norms, and self-efficacy. Only motivation is not enough. You need to have enabling factors. So you need to be able to perform this desired behavior. And on top of this, what is very important is to have some reinforcing factors. These are usually internal, such as feedbacks from your peers or experts, which allow you to engage in the behavior change more permanently. So what was just to summarize the key messages from what we extracted from psychologists is that knowledge is a precondition. However, it's not sufficient for behavioral change on its own. And based on the literature, we find out that effectiveness of environmental campaigns, which only based on the information, is very low compared to others. So very important issue is to attention of the audience and their involvement and ways how we can overcome this skepticism. Financial cost or inconvenience and, for example, old behavior problem patterns are seen as main barriers. And so now just a few tips from literature is what makes it successful is that you need to make sustainable behavior as a social default, emphasize your personal link with it, make hidden information visible, foster mindfulness, and create different opportunities for competence, skills, and knowledge, make change a byproduct of other events, and of course, balance urgency with realistic hope. It's from the literature. And now we would like to know your views from the audience. Okay, so we try now to start the poll where you would have a question. You have to think one experience of changing behavior in your own professional or personal life at some point, and tell us what was your main driver. Okay, так. And oops, violence. Continue. You need to vote now. You should have the small box popped up on your screen. Please choose one of the options or several. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's still, we have maybe half people voted, so we're waiting just a few more seconds. Almost everyone have voted. I think maybe that's the last minute. Okay. Oh, someone else. Okay. The last chance. Okay. Reportage?
Yeah. Maybe one element from the pool is maybe John and Steve will be able to react also, is that maybe you have a specific audience when you attend our webinars, because you see, for example, that economic driver that is identified in the literature as a key element, for example, doesn't seem to score very high in this group, but you get a lot around emotions and your own satisfactions. And so maybe there is already you do a certain awareness of the importance of the oceans and explaining why you might act and differently. Maybe we ask John and Steve to give a few elements from their own perspective, from your project that you have been working with. What do you think, how important is knowledge? Some of the constraint difficulties you might face when you feel you accompany or you work with others, or you work with your own peers in terms of changing behavior?
Yeah, shall I go first? Yes, I think it's interesting that this is about I know but I don't act, and there is an experience of people wanting knowledge, but then being overwhelmed by what they actually the information that they have to hand. Sea Change was very interested in how people participate, how people get involved, and had a whole process on social innovation, participation and processes to try and evaluate how people get involved, why they get involved, and what works. And we did try to do that a lot through a lot of, if you like, bottom-up approach to try and get people their ideas involved in what could be done for ocean literacy, rather than being imposed and that information coming down, because I think there is an issue over people buying in and being able to do something. So an example of that was in Spain. We ran a thing called Message in a Bottle, which a competition winner within Sea Change came forward with the idea, and they used that to have a message in a bottle that travelled around Spain, and people pledged how they would change their attitude to the ocean. And that's very much that participation and feeling you can actually do something rather than slightly remote. But I agree that there's an issue with you knowing but not being able to act for various reasons. I'm not sure that answers your question, but that's at least some of the experience.
Thanks a lot, John. So what I understand from what you say is that a key element is in fact the process itself in which you mobilize target groups in co-building, and then as a result, change of behavior is facilitated.
Yes, and giving people an option to change behavior. Sometimes I think we give them a lot of information, but that doesn't actually help with how can I change my behavior. If you're not giving that option or local feeling and local ownership, then you've got some problems.
It's true that if you ask me not stop using plastics, and if I look at the office around myself, all what needs to disappear, I have not much left.
There's plastic behind you. Yeah.
Steve, your turn, a bit thinking that you had from your own experiences that could put some light, add to what Olga presented.
Yeah, thank you, Pierre. Thank you, Olga. So I guess, just want to comment first of all on the having knowledge but not acting points before I share a specific example. A piece of work that we've recently been doing at UNEP WCMC in Cambridge is to identify the impact of dive tourists on coral reefs and trying to find ways of changing damaging behaviour. And the methodology that we've developed is to identify the impact pathway of the activity and then seeking to identify intervention points, but not just intervention points in a general sense, like a diver touching a reef, but trying to really identify which subset of divers do it, what age group, what nationalities they come from, and then really trying to understand the values that that subset of divers have. So the behaviour change based on some aspect of ocean literacy, it isn't a general message that's applicable to everybody. It's a very tailored message that's focused and specific to a particular group. So the comment about knowledge but not acting, maybe there's a function there of maybe not providing the right knowledge or the correctly framed knowledge, or using words that actually mean something to that target population. So it is really about being incredibly specific in both the behaviour that is being encouraged to change and the messages for the target group that are undertaking that behaviour. And if I have time, I just wanted to share a very quick example from a European project that is now ended called Melisco, which is, if anybody wants to look at this, the website is still up. It's marlisco.eu, and this was a project specifically to encourage citizen behaviour change around marine litter. There's a whole load of information on the website about it if you want to follow that up. But one aspect of the project was to try and develop an intervention to change children's attitude and behaviour around litter. And the way the intervention was framed was as a video contest. And much to our surprise, over 379 videos were submitted, representing over 2,000 children. And those are all available, or a selection of them, I should say, are available on the website. And some of them are amazingly charming and impactful and emotional. So I would really suggest you have a look at some of those if you wish to. But a before and after survey was done of those children in terms of their attitudes and intention to behave in a certain way with respect to marine litter. And we found that there was an increase in, a change in behaviour as a result of engaging in the video contest. There was an increase in litter separation, so more recycling. There was an increase in reusable items. There was an increase in not using plastic, so a decrease in plastic use. And there was an increase in buying products with less plastic packaging. So there was a clear behaviour change as a result of that specifically designed and targeted, very focused intervention.
Thanks a lot, Steve, because what I understand from your side is that it's not only the type of knowledge that you bring, and it goes back a bit to what John said, but it's also the mechanism and the way you engage people when you make reference to YouTube. And the key element is also how you share and discuss about knowledge using the right jargon and what is relevant for the target group, and for the subtype of target groups that you are dealing with.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But the key thing really is clearly identifying the target group and the desired behaviour change.
Yeah. I suggest we move to the next questions. The next question was about the type of knowledge, and so we try to forget a bit about the target group. We keep it in mind. But our next questions was, so what do we think is worth knowing when we talk about literacy, raising awareness, education, etc. So what could be the right information to share? Knowing, if I go back to what Steve said, is clearly depending on who you target, information and the way you share information will be different. The first to start with, Olga, the second
Yes.
pool? Or?
Yes, we wanted to actually engage you into the second poll. There's only two. This one we would like to know when, when you think about the ocean literacy is about bringing knowledge about what? So I will start the poll. It acts the same way as before. Now, how do I go to the second one here? Yeah. And on set. You should have it on your screen. Please do the same as before. You have several options here. You think that ocean literacy is about knowledge about current health of the ocean, the pressures of the marine ecosystem. Is it about people's consumption habit, impacts of economic actors? What should be done? How can we improve? Potential benefits, sustainable growth, or other type of knowledge? Let's see.
Maybe a question that is a bit more challenging.
More choices here.
More choices.
You
and
can
probably,
do several.
Probably not the right choices. If I go back to what Steve said, is that everybody will have his own ideas depending on who you have in mind when you think about the right knowledge for whom. Let's say myself, children, professional fishermen. There are people that come from the fishermen associations, etc., etc. So
there are certainly more words. So are you saying there should be almost a second question about who are you?
Oh,
yeah.
that should have been the third. Okay, we still have just one or two more people. And the very last ones.
Yeah. I think maybe I look at the poll itself, the answers, and Olga will continue. The part is in line with what you find in many initiatives today that focus on the current health of the ocean and the pressures. And part is what would be interesting, useful, and very relevant to add into some of the initiatives. In particular, what could be done, what I could do myself, and some of the implication, economic implication of this change of behavior. So Olga, a couple of slides from...
First we show the...
So pressure one.
Pressure one.
No.
Well, it's not actually the surprise. So I will... You see that there are other ones which continued and... how do you go? It doesn't move for some reason. So now I will continue in line to show what, very quickly to show what we found out in our Responsible project, because we have done an analysis of ocean literacy initiatives, and what the main things we found out that most attention is given to knowledge on marine ecosystems, how important or degraded they are, and human and socio-economic dimensions are very often lacking or not given their central role. The media and communication usually targeting the general public, and it focuses on how, again, healthy or not marine ecosystems are, so on the state, and on the problems, or the pressures explaining these problems. And this is what exactly we saw from the poll, that these ones are the leading ones. Another thing we found out that professionals are informed with knowledge relevant to their own activity. They're quite knowledgeable about regulation on exerted pressures and all the technological and economic actions that are relevant. And the information for the professionals, in fact, the information about the current state or the impact of others received very little attention. So what we've been doing in the project is we proposing the framework for screening that what kind of information or knowledge we would need to have in order to enhance or to make this knowledge that we need for ocean literacy and for behavior change better. And here you see that there is information which exists on activities, on pressures, on the state, and these are covered by these sciences, while the information on impact and human welfare and responses, which is covered by other sciences such as economics, politics, psychology, arts, whatever, it's more challenging. It's needed more attention. And in addition, we feel that there are two other things that not covered very well in the driver's section, in the which is the policy and the value chain. So how the decisions, what the policy and value chains contribute to be the drivers.
I think this framework, if I go back to Steve, is not to say that every person needs to know everything about the component of this framework, but that it helps to structure a bit the information and to structure knowledge. And sometimes for some specific target groups to realize that what is of interest goes beyond the state of marine ecosystem, but is in fact in the human part, in the functioning of the value chain and in the connection between actors and activities. And that's something that is essential, because if you want to bring a positive message to initiate in a partnership a change, that's what will be essential. We go to John Steve or Steve John, a couple of reactions about the right information. We already heard from Steve that right information depends on the target group. Any more thinking about the right information?
If I go first, John, if that's okay. So Pierre, you said exactly what I was about to say with your last sentence. I think the position we have to start from is that knowledge by itself does not generate behavior change, and that was clear from the opening slides that Olga presented. So the answer to the question, what is the right information to provide, has to be, it depends what you're trying to achieve. It depends what target group you're talking about and what behavior change you're trying to generate. And I find it quite interesting that the poll kind of consisted of quite sciencey options for an audience that probably is quite tuned into many of these issues already. And I guess for many of people in the audience, understanding more the pressures on marine ecosystems is a driver of their behavior. Interesting to know that. Therefore, that makes sense as a motivating factor for behavior change. But for many people in wider society who may not be coming at these questions from a marine or pro-environmental behavior context, their key question might be, what's in it for me? How does my life improve as a result of changing my behavior in some way? How is my life more convenient? Those sorts of questions. And in a sense, this is why we really have to understand the specific target audience, because unless we know the very thing that motivates them to make a change, then our message will fall on deaf ears most of the time. Over to you, Jan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would agree with that, because it really comes down to so what and why is it important to me, because you gave that range of information awareness raising areas. Of course, if you just raise awareness in something like marine engineering, well, okay, but unless people see that how it impacts them and is important to them, then there's going to be a so what element to it. Going back to you were alluding to the fact that it's often marine ecosystems and things are terrible or things are being destroyed. Those are the stories that come through. Ocean literacy is of course bigger than just the biology. talking for the Marine Biological Association, I shouldn't say that, but there is more out there than just the biology in terms of ocean literacy, and part of that was understanding how the global processes affect us all in terms of all ocean literacy. So it's not just the marine ecosystems that are important. Obviously, the right information, should be targeted to the right groups, and we should focus our attentions. But there is also a groundswell of information and awareness, and I think ocean plastic is one of those classic examples where it's gone beyond what we might have been doing in terms of ocean literacy and bits and pieces. There's been a groundswell beyond that, and you know, we may have played a small part in that, but it's far beyond that. So we ran a public event, awareness raising about the marine environment recently, and the public were very well informed on ocean plastic and the fact that it was there. They could see it and they felt they could do something about it. So I think sometimes the more general awareness, it reaches a critical point and then flows over, and that's also where some of those other areas, even like engineering, come into play, because people begin to understand those stories. The blue economy is another case in point, where using that information to suddenly realize how important plastic is in the whole economy, and how that works. So sometimes we pigeonhole people a bit too much.
Thanks a lot. Because I see time is passing, I propose we move to the third question that we had, which is a wider policy questions. That is each thinking about if we feel that knowledge, sometimes we get things go faster than knowledge, as John said, because it becomes collective. If we think that knowledge has a role, if the right knowledge targeting the right people, we understood from Olga that there were many other elements explaining how I would then use it to do something different or not to do something different. One of the third questions we were asking ourselves is if there were specific preconditions for making all our efforts that we are undertaking in different sides, in different countries, to let people understand, to work with people so we better understand, and then to get ocean literacy strengthened, if there were specific preconditions for more effective ocean literacy. And in this third questions, we will mobilize Alessia from DG Mare, so we'll have a policy perspective to it. And let's say we have seen so far from John and Steve example, but also probably from some initiatives you do, most of you, we see local level, but there were also a question of a bit the enabling conditions Olga referred to, and how policy could support and what could be some key changes required so ocean literacy becomes more effective. Two contributions, a quick one on feedbacks from the recent ocean literacy workshop that took place in the 2018 European Maritime Day in Burgas that Olga will deal with, and then we'll give the floor to Alessia for a wider EU policy perspective.
Just a very quick one, like as Pierre said, 2 weeks ago we were running an ocean literacy workshop at the European Maritime Day in Burgas, and this is just things what came out of that workshop. Ocean literacy is a start. There are very many initiatives and good practices. They are very good sources of inspiration, and we need all sectors of society need to be inspired, and we need it to be more connected and easily accessible. So it needs some kind of platforms. There are some priority gaps to be filled. We need additional target groups, for example, financial investors or consumers, tourists, and we need to be better mobilizing the media, communication experiences, and expertises. We need to continue with ocean literacy. What is needed is more lasting support of it with soft measures and strengthening human capital. And it's we need to support the implementation and contribute to sustainable growth. So the link with the workshop we had was with the blue growth industry, so it's more targeted to this. One thing that came out of the workshop was also to say that mobilizing the private sector is very challenging, and we do need to create some common platforms which would involve the private sector to build on knowledge that exists there, to recognize what challenges they are facing, and ensure common understanding. So we can build on the positive experiences and messages. And it is a starting point of co-developing together the effective ocean literacy that can change, can result in change of practices and behavior for all actors. The success, what we've noticed that there are a lot of examples of successes in local initiatives. They need to be adapted to local contexts and at the same time involve the big players of the sectors and create so-called strategic partnerships so they can become the role models and the multipliers. So to refer to things I was mentioning before, to be among these other factors that trigger and enable the behavior change. And incentives to get involved relate to the economic interest and having very clear benefits, image of the companies and access to the market, and all kind of capacity, interest spreading innovations. I think that's all from my side from our workshop.
If you see many of the elements that are here, when John referred to the issue of plastics, today you see that plastic is becoming a bit a general move with many partners, including large, big strategic business partners being part of the game, sharing their experiences, their knowledge, etc., including to find what would be changes. I think we will now give the floor to Alessia. Let's say, Alessia, from your perspective as DG Mare, it's not the first time you hear about ocean literacy. Let's say that's something that is of interest for you. Maybe you can share a bit with the group how you see literacy, how you see how marine policy you think could support what is a bit the future trend development that would need to take place so ocean literacy find its place.
Yes, good afternoon, all of you. I hope you can hear me.
Very well.
Perfect, then I go on. So first of all, thank you to Responsible and as well to Sea Change Projects for your work, because you are really helping us to frame our future policy. So both blue growth policy and the broader policy at EU level, and you help us to understand and put in practice what are your results, you know, how we can ensure that we include the ocean literacy element in the policies that we are developing. So I think you have been doing a great job, and I think also that now it's up to us and to the broad community to continue this work. I think that the third question maybe is the most difficult one. I can subscribe to all the comments that were made before by our two great speakers. And I think that before going into the policy, maybe first of all, we should think a bit out of the label. So we always talk about ocean literacy, and already this is a bit an obstacle because not everybody understands it. Not everybody knows what it is. And we spend more time in explaining what ocean literacy is rather than going into concrete examples. So we are trying to move a bit from kind of ocean literacy to ocean awareness, or more kind of easy understandable words so that can be used and understood by everybody. So it's a matter of translating a bit the concept that I know that both Responsible and Sea Change have been doing in these years, and you are carrying on doing. And I think we should a bit follow this direction. Of course, we are also coming to the realization that ocean literacy is for everybody. It's not anymore only for students, for teachers, for education, but it's for all actors of the society. I think we are already getting into a good step forward, and I think we should start from here now. And I also agree with the targeted messages. We cannot explain what oceans are the same way to kids and companies and banks and teachers. So that's also the next steps to follow. And the other element is that, of course, even if people know and have the elements, not all the time they act. And that's because I think people, as our attendees were saying, are moved by emotions. So they act only if they feel that they own the action. They are not doing for somebody else, they are doing for themselves because they really care. But as Francesca from IOC UNESCO was saying at the workshop in Burgas, people act only if they care. So first we should let people appreciate what the oceans are, and then they will start behaving accordingly. But we cannot just explain what is the problem, that's a problem, so you should change your behavior, because then people just think it's too much for me, it's too far from me, I will not do it, you know. So we have to put a bit people closer to the ocean itself rather than going straight to the problem, I think, personally. From a EU policies point of view, I think that the added value of the European Union is in fact to putting people together, gathering different stakeholders from different groups, different states, sharing experiences and bring added value and developing together joint initiatives. From our side, we are also including the ocean element as such in different policies we are developing that are both related and not related to the ocean. I can, well, make you the direct link, let's say, to the International Ocean Governance Initiative or the recent Single-Use Plastics Directive that all you're aware of course, because as we were saying, plastics now is fashionable, I would say, and that's also a bit the risk, because we risk that in like 3-5 years time is not so fashionable anymore. So we have to be kind of careful to keep high the momentum and the attention. And an indirect policy is the Future Invest EU fund. That is a big fund, is the follow of the Juncker plan. We're also there, we are trying to include ocean as such in all the parts of the Invest EU, because it is indeed cross-cutting. It touches different policies. So it is even not enough that from our side in DG Mare, we do all what we can to, as you were saying, enabling ocean literacy. But we have to go beyond, and that's what we are trying to do. So trying also to influence the other policies that are not directly linked to the oceans. Another example is Horizon Europe, for instance, the next package for research, where we have been working hard to try to get as much as possible the ocean element inside, that in a cross-cutting way. Of course, here we are working on blue growth in general and integrated maritime policy. So for me, in fact, when I talk about ocean literacy, ocean awareness, it's when I talk to all my stakeholders, and especially to those that are not still in the maritime community, but that are interested in being part, or they still don't know about it. And this could be an SME, this could be an investor, this could be a school, etc., etc. What we plan to do as regards concrete steps, and most of you know, is to launch a project by the end of the year called EU for Ocean. It's a bit replying to the needs that I have been hearing so far. So creating a common platform at European level where we plan to have messages per target group. So the coalition will in fact include different target groups that are schools, private sector, banks, philanthropists, scientists, etc. And for each group there will be activities topics to be discussed, initiatives to be shared, and new initiatives to be developed and implemented. So we would really like to go beyond the sharing, but we would like people to get even more active and to develop together new actions. Within this platform, we will develop as well a European network of blue schools, where we will invite all schools across Europe to propose an action to be implemented with or without the cooperation of other schools or other companies, up to them to decide, in order to get a label of blue school in Europe. And we hope that with all these initiatives, we are able to expand the community and to have also a bit of passe-parole, that indeed also it's what is needed here, because you need people to talk about this thing more and more and more. And it's a bit like the plastics again. It started small and then it grew, and now it's trendy. So our objective is try to make the ocean trendy in some years' time. And the third block is to involve more the young people, because they are the engine of our society at the end. So if we have youngsters across Europe more active, that want to take more initiatives at local level, to have innovative approaches, ways to communicate, they are welcome to do it. So we also plan to have a European Youth Forum for the ocean, where we will select young ocean leaders. And again, we want to have champions, ambassadors, because we feel that, as I mentioned before, people are moved by emotions more than knowledge. So if they see a sport champion, a musician, a painter, somebody that is very famous and is also very interested and passionate about the ocean, maybe they will follow more and they will get to know more issues related to the oceans. So that's a bit what I wanted to say. I also think there are out there many other opportunities we are not using enough yet. For instance, tourism in summer. I mean, the beaches of Europe are full of tourists in summer. And I still don't see enough activities taking place in the beaches, for instance. They could be activities with kids, schools, parents, whoever. And I think there is still a bit of missed opportunity that we should take there. So so that's a bit the points I wanted to make. I hope I have tried to reply to the difficult third and last question. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alessia. Thank you very much for bringing this wider policy context also on the table. I think you're right in a sense, and that maybe part of the concluding remarks is for people that attend the webinars, but wider, do not get stopped by the word ocean literacy. I think what is essential that is behind this word is that it's the focus on human capital, people, and capacity to change. I think that what is behind this word. The message that we heard is clearly it's an issue for everybody, and everybody means, if I go back to your point, Alessia, of making EU blue schools, it means that we need to have EU blue schools not only on the coast, but also blue schools in Strasbourg, where we are located now, because we have a tendency to think that ocean is an issue for people on the coast, but most of our activities inland, let's say when I eat, when I buy something, will have impacts directly or indirectly on the sea itself. And so it's also, we hope that we will have blue schools in Alsace in the future. And maybe the questions that you ask, how to make sure we keep the ocean trendy, that can be a way to stop our discussions. So let's say each of us, we can try to think how to seize opportunities. There are many untapped, and how we can then contribute to make the ocean trendy. That's part of a story, but this trendiness is translated in actions and some changes in the way we live and the way we act ourselves. I would propose it's 3:01. We had put webinars for 1 hour. We felt it was long enough, not too long. The objective was to let you think about it, think about this issue, building on what John, Steve, Olga, Alessia shared with you, different perspectives, different initiatives. Probably much more issues to be addressed, much more questions. And if you have other issues you think we need to address, or key initiatives that are source of inspiration, that can be source of inspiration, write it in the question answer mode, or just you will see after the webinar when you get out of Zoom, there is a small questionnaires, and we will be very happy to follow up on what you share with us, including for the next webinar. So the next webinars on September 13, Children and the Ocean. So we might go back to Blue Schools. We might go back to some of the initiatives that already exist in Europe and elsewhere, working with children, with and for children, with and for educators in our own perspective. And maybe from what you said, Alessia, maybe we should say children and the youth, have a bit a wider look at the definition of children, knowing all the challenges we might have to capture the attention of the youth. So, Olga, I think we can warmly thank Alessia, John, and Steve for being with us for this hour. Many thanks. I think thanks to the participants also, so we got more or less a group that stayed throughout the hour. If you could virtually clap in your hand and say thank you to Steve, Alessia, and John, very much appreciated. And as what said, this is the first step in a series of webinars. We hope that after the webinars, the ideas you give to us will help us to be adaptive and bring knowledge and information that responds to your needs. A bit like what Steve said, we all are a specific target group. So we need to ensure that information we provide to you is relevant.
You can contact us if you have any of those ideas and things, just write to us and we get in contact. Thank you again.
And we officially close the webinar. Thank you, and come to the next one.
Thanks very much.
Have a wonderful afternoon.